Hi. Can I show
Hi.
you my outfit?
Oh my God, yes. Please show
We're
me your
doing
outfit.
video today, so like I usually just wear a cute top and then pajama pants and nobody knows the difference.
I wear no pants.
Oh, that's a fun little Easter egg for anyone who watches our YouTubes. Amber just doesn't wear pants.
No, I'm wearing pants today.
Yeah, I'm
I'm wearing
wearing
jeans. It's all good.
yeah. Oh, look, that's pants.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead. What's your
So,
outfit?
yeah, I'm gonna stand up and do a whole shebang here. I got this choo-choo train shirt.
Choo choo. Oh my God, it's so
Train right on it.
cute.
Yeah, and then but that it's not over
And these
yet.
pants, these shorts. Oh.
Yeah, I got these like
Oh.
vintage shorts, and then I
These...
left my boots on, so I,
to show the full outfit, obviously.
yeah. Now I'm about to take them off. Oh shit! But yeah, that's what we're wearing today.
I love it. I love those shorts. Those are
Thank
like
you.
they're reminding me of something like from my childhood. I feel like I had something like those when I was a kid, and I just like the scalloped edge or at the
Yeah,
bottom with the stripe is just we don't have enough textures in our shorts these days.
they don't give cool shorts to adults. You're just supposed to kind of wear shorts and be satisfied with that. I say bring back, Rick Rack. They
Yeah.
put Rick Rack on shorts for children. You don't get Rick Rack on your shorts if you're a grown up. What the hell is that?
What is that about? That's very
Yeah,
upsetting.
it's
Yeah.
discrimination.
I mean, it's now like summer season. I mean, yeah, everywhere, but in California, it's very, very, very hot right now. I don't know how hot it is in New York just yet.
It's getting hot enough that like I'm starting to get nervous about what I'm gonna do to record when
Oh yeah,
with my AC. It's just it's
yeah.
loud as fuck. That's why I moved my mic, is because I thought that I could defeat it
Mm.
by having the mic facing away. That did not in any way work, but for
Oh
about
no,
10 minutes I thought that it might, and I felt pretty cool and smart, so that was something.
I ran it this morning. I ran it like for 2 hours before the podcast, and
Yeah.
then turned it off. That's what I'm gonna try to do, but we'll see how well it works. But you see different outfits coming out during the summertime, and I just I really enjoy seeing everyone get all slutty for the summer season. I'm like, yes,
I do
go. You don't
too.
need to wear anything. Like, absolutely. Wear a bathing
Yeah.
suit to dinner. Go for it.
That's a big part of, I mean, I dress like a slut because it's fun and because I think I look good,
Yes.
but a big part of it is also that I am just the sweatiest person alive, and
Same.
it helps to not be wearing a bunch of bullshit. Like
Yeah.
that's I want to fight people when they're like you should cover up after the age of such and such. I am only getting more warm as time
Yes,
goes on.
exactly. And then imagine what's going to happen when we go through menopause. Oh my God, I'm going to go around naked because
Right.
yeah, I don't want my clothes to soak up that sweat. It like ruins the whole purpose of sweat of being evaporated off of my skin and actually cooling me down. And also it looks ugly under my armpits when it's a stain yellow. No, no.
No, I'm
Also,
not
that
doing
yellow
that.
situation is honestly usually from deodorants.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently, like in chemical deodorants, the iron that's in them or something, it's what turns yellow a lot of the time. So if you wear natural deodorants, you'll have less yellow stains on your white shirts.
I don't really wear white shirts because I'm the
No.
sweatiest person alive. Like it's that bad. There's whole colors on the spectrum that are not available to me for
Yeah.
about 5 months out of the year because I've owned white shirts, and it's always the back of the neck gets disgusting and
Mm.
under the arms gets disgusting, and regardless of what the source is, nothing makes me feel like a foul little creature like ruining white clothing.
I am wearing a white shirt right now, but I want to say that it is like the lightest material you could imagine. This is like a tissue paper
I can tell,
situation, but
yeah.
yeah, it has holes in it like all over because of this.
Ventilation, yeah.
Yeah.
That's just more ventilation, baby.
Plus, it looks cool. It looks super cool.
It
Did you
does.
see? Did you see the moon last night? Did you go out and?
No, we drove back from Baltimore and it took like 6 hours, which is
Mm.
like twice as long as it should take.
Oh
So
man.
once we were in for the night, there was no getting me to even look out my window. The outside
Mhm.
world was just over starting at 8 p.m.
Well, there was like a harvest moon last night. It was like it was all orange, like a blood moon, and
I
it
like
was
that.
really pretty. And we went out looking for it last night. First, we like went out in our front yard and could not see it, and felt very frustrated that we couldn't find the moon in the sky. But we got to higher ground, found it, and yeah, it was really pretty. It made me feel like a little speck in the universe, and that's nice sometimes to remember that
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, you're just a little speck in the
I like
universe.
that feeling. Yeah, I deliberately seek out that feeling whenever possible.
Yeah.
Living in New York gives you like the shitty inverse of that feeling. Like you feel like a little speck, but it's
Yes.
frustrating because nobody,
Yeah. Because you
you
can't
can't
get
get
anything
shit
done.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're running up against a wall. Yeah, no, this is a, yeah, I know that feeling too. I like the feeling of like a little speck, it doesn't matter, but like also it all matters. It's just, yeah. I don't know. I get main character syndrome too much, so it's good to remind myself that I'm,
I have the other, what's the other one? You use the term like asshole at the center of the
yeah, piece of shit
universe.
at the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my
Yeah.
favorite terms.
I have that big time. I don't have the one where I think I'm good. I
Yeah,
have the one where I've ruined everything
I've
for
got it. Everything's my
everybody.
fault. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That, which is like a thing, which is a very powerful thing to feel. You're like, oh, I am so powerful that I've ruined everything, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Because you're not, you are very powerful, Rex, but you are not
Thank you.
powerful enough to ruin everything.
Well, we'll see. Things are going pretty bad in the world right now, and you
Oh,
can't prove that it's not my doing.
it is not your doing. I, it would never be your doing. Um,
Yeah.
let's introduce the pod.
Yes, welcome to Low Culture Boil, the trash podcast about trash culture. I am your host, Rax King.
And I am your host, Amber Rollo. And today we are talking about Atlantic City.
Oh my
Um,
God, I love Atlantic City. You were supposed to be in Atlantic City, no? Yeah.
yeah, last weekend I was supposed to be in Atlantic City for a bachelorette party, and it got canceled because my friend got COVID. She was asymptomatic. She's totally fine. She works in the film industry though and has to get tested all the time, and
Right.
her test came back positive, and so she was like, "Yeah, well, naturally I can't have a bachelorette party and give everyone COVID." So she had to cancel, which really sucks because she's one of the best people I know and deserves, really, like, has been putting off her wedding for this whole time and like really just deserves a bachelorette party. But we're gonna do something for her, we think, the like a couple days before the wedding. So
Oh, it
it'll,
sucks.
yeah. But Atlantic City is one of my favorite places in the world. Little Vegas is what it's called, which is very funny to me because it was around way before Vegas was around. But
I like it better than Vegas. I've
me
spent
too.
more time there,
Me too.
but Vegas is too much. It's like, it's the scale of it. I
Yeah.
can't tolerate. I can't do that many lit up buildings of that size. And Atlantic City is like a pocket Vegas. It's so much better
Yeah.
for me.
I totally agree. When it's like that much excitement and lights and sin all in one place, I would like it to be. I want to be able to visualize it in my head. And Vegas, I feel like, is so big, I can't visualize it all. Do
And
you know what I
also,
mean?
Atlantic City is in that same vein. There's actually a lot of stuff to do that
Yeah.
isn't just, gambling in a casino, which might be true of Vegas too, but I just feel like Vegas does not pitch any of that stuff to would-be visitors at all. It's all about like legalized prostitution,
Yeah.
come to, and gamble all day long, and then like pay to fuck women all night long. And it's like, what about like a slice of pizza? What,
Yeah.
what about a public library? Just what about a normal thing? I'm sure all that stuff is there for the people who live there, but
Yeah.
it's not known to me.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because like Vegas was built on being gambling. Like that was what was it was proposed as, whereas Atlantic City was not proposed as
Right.
like a Sin City first and foremost. Originally, Atlantic City was proposed as a health resort for the wealthy, which is totally not what it ever was. But
Oh, that fell
that
through so hard.
that proposition what like did have some effect on how it presented itself, I think.
Yeah.
And the reason why it like became family friendly and there were other options of things to do other than just gambling and prostitution. But let's get into it. Before it was Atlantic City that we know, like what we know of as Atlantic City today, it was actually the summer home of the Lenape people, the indigenous people, the Lenape. They used to summer in South Jersey, specifically Atlantic City. They called it Absagami, meaning little water. And the reason they called it that was because they could see the other side of the bay. So it was like just a little bit of water before the other side of the bay. That was quickly shortened and transformed by the British and Spanish into Absecon Island. So that's generally what it was called before it was called Atlantic City. In 1758, there was the Treaty of Easton, and that was where the Lenape people and the British and everyone that was living in this area, they convinced the Lenape to give up all residency in South Jersey for what was essentially 1,000 Spanish dollars. And it wasn't even like dollars, it was mostly finished goods like pots and pans and like a covered island. I mean, a covered wagon. Like very, it was a really, really, really raw deal. It was
Yeah.
surprisingly the like most fair deal they had made so far. Before that, they didn't even like have treaties. What they did basically was just backdate property ownership and be like, oh, we've owned this since before. They just
Fucking
lied.
scumbags.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It never ceases to blow my mind how unabashedly scummy the original colonizers were, like
Hmm.
every step of the way. That just no shame whatsoever that I
Yeah.
know of.
Yeah, no. And at least in the Treaty of Easton they actually did have like Lenape chiefs come in and negotiate on their own behalf, but they had already been like they'd already taken their legs out from underneath them by converting a lot of them to Christianity and convincing them that they had to be passive and they couldn't go to war for their land. So that sucked. It was generally bad, and the reason they were doing the Treaty of Easton is they said they didn't want the Lenape to fight on behalf of the French in the war that was going on right then. So they were like, okay, how do we move you like out of the way? So they basically moved them all to Delaware.
Oh God, Delaware sucks. Of all the insults in that entire deal, they had to live in Delaware.
Yeah. And then the first guy to build a year-round home on what came to be known as Atlantic City was Jeremiah Leeds. And he loved living in solitude. He loved living in nature. He was like, this is far away from everything. I am going to go to this island and build my home and farm and build my family here. And he did. And he kept on buying more and more land. He never sold any. He just kept on buying more of the land from the government. And he owned a lot of what is now Atlantic City. And in 1850, this man, Jonathan Pitney, came along. He was a physician. And he saw the island and he was like, wow, this could be a resort. Pitney was a physician and he was really tired of being a physician. He wanted to do something more important than save people's lives. He was like, I want to be rich and famous, basically.
I want to stop putting leeches on people. I am so fucking sick of leeches. I mean,
I
fair
mean,
enough.
fair, fair. Yeah. To his credit, the medical science was not great at the time. Like I put a couple examples of this in
Yeah,
the outline.
tell them the factoid that you made me read. You make them suffer like I've suffered.
So in 1799, George Washington, he had a cold, mostly because he went out in the rain, he got wet, he came home. They said you should change out of your like many layers of wet clothes, and he was like, "No, I have other things to do," and he continued on with his day. And he
I have other
refused to
things
change
to
out of his
do.
wet clothes.
Fucking toddler logic.
I mean, I get it. Like, outfits were very detailed then, so like it
That's
probably took like
true.
an hour to get out of clothes and back into other clothes. Maybe he didn't even have another change of clothes. He's like
Yeah, he was like,
the
these are
man
my
of his time.
breeches. I'm not gonna not wear my breeches. These are the ones that I have.
So he got a cold, and the doctors came in and they bled him. And that didn't work, so they bled him some more, and that didn't work, so they bled him some more, and essentially they bled him to death.
That's really funny that at no point did he protest. I feel like if it's me, at a certain point, I gotta be like, Doc, you can't have any more of my blood. Like I need some of that to for my bodily
For
functions and
living.
whatnot. Yeah. He's just like politely lying there, like, all right, well, do your thing.
He was like a little bit too polite. Like his wife Martha wanted to like go out and get a doctor for him earlier, but she had just gotten over a cold herself, and he was like, "No, no, no, you cannot leave the bedroom." Like,
Oh my God.
so yeah, I think he was a little bit too polite to speak up about the bleeding, and so they bled him to death. Like similarly in 1881, which is a little bit later than when Jonathan Pitney came around, but it still hadn't improved. In 1881, President James A. Garfield, was shot, and they didn't really have to do anything. They could have sewn him up, and where the bullet was would have been totally fine. Uh, it would have been fine. But instead, they stuck dirty fingers in his wound. They did not get the bullet. They just stuck dirty fingers in his
Digging
wound
around.
unsuccessfully. Then they decided that he couldn't eat because they thought maybe the bullet was like in his stomach or something. It was not. He totally could eat if he wanted to, but they were like, no, you can't eat. Um, and so they fed him a mixture of whiskey and bouillon base rectally.
For those of you out there who think that's a way that people ingest drugs, yes, it is. It's
It
called
is.
buffing. And I mean, I'm not a doctor myself, maybe one of y'all is. I do not believe it is medically advisable to buff soup. That's
It's
what bouillon base is. I do not want chicken noodle soup up my asshole. Like any number of other things are like kosher by me, but not whiskey and not soup.
Oh my god. And of course, James A. Garfield was already was fighting an infection from these dirty
From all
fingers
the
in his
other
bullet
doctoring,
wound.
yeah.
So yeah, so he died as well. He would have been totally fine if they had just left him the fuck alone. So I get where Pitney's like,
Doctors are just murderers at this time.
yeah.
That's like a really good line of work to go into if your thing is murder, I think, is doctoring.
I mean, I get why like Christian Scientists were popular.
Totally, yeah, because people are like, ever notice how all the guys who go to the doctor just die?
Maybe
What if
pray
we
to
stop
God.
doing that?
Yeah, how
Yeah.
about just pray to God instead?
Just pray. It can't do more damage.
Exactly. So Pitney was like, I want to start this health resort. And he tried to get municipal backing for the railroad. He needed a railroad to get there.
Yeah, Atlantic City's like kind of remote.
Yes.
If you're
Yeah.
not familiar with it, like obviously it's very easy to get to now, it's cars and buses and shit. But in the era of this kind of doctor who is actually just a psychopathic killer, another little inconvenience is you could not fucking get anywhere, and
Mm-mm.
certainly not to like the nasty ass marshland of Atlantic City. Also, what a place to have your health resort. I mean, we're going to talk about that shortly, but it is not the appropriate environment to make people healthy at, which I guess this guy wouldn't have known because he was just a doctor.
I mean, I am sort of impressed by Pitney's extreme vision
Yeah.
because nobody else saw it. And you know what? He made it happen. But it was not easy to see. I mean, like you said, it's just a marsh with sand dunes and weeds and like some forests, a lot of like swampy areas. It's gross. But he was like, yes, health resort. Don't know how he saw that, but
This
sure.
whole first hour is just like every single reason you can imagine for somebody to not build a resort in this place. There are so many reasons not to do it. And this guy, it's like he couldn't think of a second place or
No,
something. America
exactly.
was like not that settled at this point. He had kind of a lot of places he could have picked from and gotten super cheap land. And instead, he's just like fixated on this mosquito ridden shithole. He's like,
Yes.
I gotta make people healthy here. I gotta do it. It's gotta be here.
He got so fixated on it. He really did. Like he sent so many letters to the government being like, "Please, let's build a railroad here. It would be so great for the economy. It would be great for people's health. Let's do it. Let's
And they're like,
build a
no, it
railroad."
sucks there. You
Yeah.
can't have money for that shit. It's a fucking boondoggle.
They're like, "Public money for this?"
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But then in 1852, Pitney finally got backing for the railroad by partnering with Samuel Richards, who was a member of the richest and most influential family in South Jersey. And through with Samuel Richards, he got some other investors as well. These guys wanted to build a railroad because they wanted a railroad from like their farms and like factories and their own businesses to Philadelphia, where there was the port. So they were like, yeah, it makes sense for us to build a railroad. The idea of it ending in Atlantic City was sort of second hand. Like they didn't really think about it that much. In fact, they really, really did not think about it, so much so that they didn't even see the spot until 2 days before they were supposed to start building the railroad. And then they saw it. Samuel Richards saw it for the first time, and he was like, "This is the worst place to end a railroad I have ever seen."
It is
It's
just downright dog shit of a place. It's out of the way. It's disgusting.
it's just all sand dunes. Like hanging out by the beach wasn't even really a thing then. So they were like, "What do we do here?"
You can't grow
Um,
anything in sand, and
mm-mm.
it's just, yeah, you're not like lying out in the sand enjoying the ocean. It's just a pain in your ass.
Yeah. They were very confused, but they were like, you know, we're already this far along, and really, it doesn't matter where the railroad ends. If, like, this guy wants to start a health resort here, whatever, we'll do that. We'll just continue with the railroad. And they brought in this engineer from Philadelphia, Richard B. Osborne, and he designed the city and the railroad. And basically, by designing the railroad, I mean, he said it's going to go straight from the city center to Philadelphia. It's just going to go straight, and that means it's going to go through the forest, over roads that are already there. Like, it doesn't matter. Anything in the way, we are cutting down. Not much of a design, but you know it worked. And actually, Richard
Kind
B.
of.
Kind of.
It a little bit worked.
He also came up with the name Atlantic City. He was like, "Hey, a city by the Atlantic Ocean. How about Atlantic City?" And the investors were like, "Yes, sounds great."
That's the kind of shit you used to be able to do. You know, it makes me think of like how bands used to just be named any old thing. And now you got to call your band the craziest shit because all the other names are taken. You could call a place Atlantic City. That shit wasn't taken yet.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, Richard B. Osborne built it, and while he was designing the town and building the railroad, Richards and Pitney were going along and buying up all of the land. They had a feeling that after there was a railroad that ended at this spot, that land would be a lot more valuable. Um, so they went around and bought it all. They bought it from either the government when it was unowned land, or they bought it from Leeds family members. So Leeds, all of his relatives now owned this land, and they didn't all want to be farmers and didn't all love living in solitude the way Jeremiah did. So they were like very excited to sell it. And they sold it to Pitney and Richards for like $1 per square foot. Super, super cheap. Um, and they bought so much land, in fact, that the government stepped in at one point and was like, you guys can't buy any more land. Like they passed an ordinance. They're like, you are not allowed to buy any more land. This is too much. You're doing too much. And Richards and Pitney were like, okay. So then they started a company and they bought land under that company name.
Boy, does that sound familiar.
Mm-hmm,
That's just
mm-hmm.
the procedure that has guided like every corner of American life since about that time. Is like if you're so rich that the government starts telling you you can't do something, make a company, and that company will do everything you're suddenly not allowed to do.
Exactly, because corporations are people.
Right,
So it's a
yeah.
different person buying it now.
Yeah, it's like three billionaires in a trench coat. That's what most companies are.
America is 3 billionaires in a trench coat. Uh, uh, yeah, so that's they were going around buying land. That's essentially why now, side note, fun fact, the board game Monopoly was designed after Atlantic City. So all the
Right.
names of all the spots are named after streets and places in Atlantic City. And it makes total sense because this city that was like built from scratch, purely tourist driven, is really a great opportunity for Monopoly. They could like buy up and start as many businesses and own as many places wholly uh, that they wanted,
Right.
and they did. In 1854, the city was incorporated and the railroad opened, and businesses started popping up almost immediately. And there were these places called excursion houses where visitors would go and they would change out of their dusty railroad clothes. And the reason why their railroad clothes were dusty was because the trains didn't have windows at the time. They just had covered like curtains covering the windows, like no glass. So in
What
order
the
to,
fuck?
yeah,
That
so
is such an easy thing to not do to people.
which is really weird because windows existed, you know?
Windows completely existed. My
Windows,
first thought as you were saying that was like because Windows didn't exist yet. No, that's
they
not right.
existed.
It
They
existed
totally
for a
existed.
while. There were
But
glaziers.
I don't know why. But yeah, so they it was just laziness, I think, and like
That's just
cost.
mean. Yeah,
And
cost.
so people wore like goggles and like helmets and like an extra covering of clothes to protect themselves from the dust on the train, and then they would change out of it. And they would then also like go and rent bathing suits, which, were like at the time bathing outfits, like full outfits.
Yeah, I think costumes they used to be
Bathing
called, like
costumes,
swimming
yes.
costumes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, And the excursion houses also had food, places where you could eat, places where you could drink. And the first season that it was open for summer, Atlantic City did really well. People were really excited. They had never like been to the sea before. It was really cool because you could go from Philadelphia to Atlantic City for a day trip. So working class people who never really had time for a vacation could go to the sea for the day. It wasn't like a possibility before. They only had 1 day off per week usually. These were like this is like people who were working in the factories who were generally immigrants, like not even like the British and the Spanish that were working there before. There was a boon, like an industrial boon happening in Philadelphia at the time. So there was a big population of people who wanted to get out of Philadelphia. And we could talk a little bit more about like why they wanted to get out of Philadelphia later. Um, so it was a success, and Richards and Pitney started selling off the land to all the businesses who wanted to open, and they sold it off for about $300 a square foot.
What?
Yeah.
That's 300 more dollars than 299 more dollars than they bought it at. Fucking
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yep. Really, yeah, insider trading, basically. Um, And there was one issue though. There were tons. Like the first season, they had a low amount of bugs for some reason, but quickly they realized that there were tons of bugs. So many mosquitoes and these giant green flies that would bite people.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Mm.
Love to go on a biting vacation. That sounds so
Yeah.
relaxing to me.
It was really bad. It got them bad press. People didn't like it, but also at the same time, it was affordable. There weren't many other options at the time, so it did keep going. Atlantic City did keep chugging along, but it wasn't great.
What a horrible way to spend, like, if you're just some guy living in Philly, not making a whole lot of money in whatever, factory or whatever you've started working in, and you're just like, I gotta take my family to like see some sun and have a nice day at the shore. And you take the train and it's just whipping dust into your face and skin and clothes. There's no windows, but you're just like, okay, but this is the bad part. Once I get there, there definitely won't be giant green flies biting my dick and ass. And then, wouldn't you know it, Jesus, what a bad day that is. What a bad day for your whole family to have inflicted on them.
Yeah. People kept coming. I don't know why exactly. I mean, I guess it was better than Philadelphia, that was all run by Quakers. Um,
I'll take the Quakers, man. I just, like, that's not ideal for me as a Jew, but I'm not really trying to get bit all over my person by giant green flies. I'm used to mosquitoes. That doesn't sound as
yeah.
horrible to me. Biting flies is not my scene at all.
No, it sounds really bad. It sounds really disturbing. And they kept on trying to get rid of them. They were not really successful. They were pouring like cold water on top of all the ponds and seeing if that would like help kill them. It did sort of. Eventually, they were able to get rid of them. It took them like a couple decades though to figure it out. They filled in a lot of the puddles and swamps with sand and they combed through all of the sand dunes. So they did like a little ecological damage. Just,
I'll say,
yeah.
Jesus. Just
But
like that's how people used to plan towns. Like the vibe was if there were giant pests, you just had to kill them all. It was just pest genocide.
mhm.
That's what your first thought was. Like how do I affect the world around me such that these animals are dead forever?
Yeah, exactly. And now we have things like we're worried about keeping all the bees alive. Who
Yeah.
knows what sort of effect this had on the system, but whatever. That was the way of the time. Yeah, the Pitney had like we had talked about how he wanted this to be a health resort. He wanted it to be a health resort for the very wealthy white folks, but they didn't want to come there, obviously. They
Yeah, they're
also
like,
were
I'm not gonna get bit all over my dick and ass by bugs. Fuck you, I have money.
they also already had a place where they vacationed in Cape May, so they were kind of stuck in their ways. They didn't want to try out Atlantic City. They were probably right at the time, but AC still tried to present itself as a health resort. They had like all these pamphlets at the railroad stations where they talked about the ozone by the sea. Apparently, ozone is good for you, and you get
Just
more of it
making
by the
shit up.
ocean.
Absolutely 100% making shit up, just out of whole cloth. It's kind of impressive. Like they had some really good imaginations, these guys.
Oh my God, their imaginations were they're great. They had this claim that Atlantic City was warmer than other East Coast cities because there was a ocean current that like went directly into the coast right at Atlantic City, but then it turned directly back out, so it missed all the other beach cities.
Oh,
So
sure.
they weren't as cold as other cities. They were like trying to get more business outside of just the seasonal summer visitors. And they would print basic lies saying like uh, when there was like big snow days in Philadelphia, they would print papers saying no snow on the boardwalk, and they like swept all the snow off the boardwalk and like took a picture and then printed it.
Jesus Christ. And then people get there and they're like, wait a minute.
Wait a second. Wait
There's
a
snow
second.
here? Yeah, because that's not possible.
Yeah. In the 1860s, after they finally got rid of all the bugs, they started having fancier hotels being built. There was three like main hoteliers that like changed the game. There was Benjamin Brown, Charles McGlade, and the Whites. The Whites were the last name of a very wealthy family, but they also were white.
Yeah,
And yeah, it brings up an important point because the history of Atlantic City, making visitors feel fancy and fussed over was really, really, really important, especially because they were working class visitors who didn't get to feel fancy anywhere else. So this was like a lot of the draw. But making people feel fancy and fussed over is very labor intensive, and the labor was done mostly, almost entirely, by black freed slaves. The working for hotels was like some of the best work that freed slaves could get because there was mobility. It came with lodging and food. You could actually scrape by and save up some money. That being said, it was horrible. Really, 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 really awful work. Like they treated their workers really terribly. By lodging, I mean like in the back of a hotel, like in a basement with like no like running water or electricity sometimes, like just really poor conditions. But it was better than being like a general servant, where you worked 12-hour days. You were responsible for the cooking, the cleaning, the caretaking of the kids. Like that is a so much more of a job than one person should be doing. But basically, that was one of the very few jobs that freed slaves were allowed to get. That or being a sharecropper, which is essentially still being enslaved,
right.
because you could never, ever, ever get out of debt. So a lot of the freed slaves came to Atlantic City and started working in the hotels. And it was, it was, it was the only labor that they could get because they were, like I said, catering to working class immigrants coming from Philadelphia. Philadelphia workers were immigrants because that was the only labor the factories could get, because the people that were already living in Philadelphia that like had specialized skills that were apprentices and had like their own businesses didn't want to work in the factories. So it was like this lowering down of uh, just worse and worse circumstances of living. Just just bad life on top of bad life is what it seemed like. And yeah, they were all that you could not have Atlantic City if it weren't for freed slaves.
Right.
But
Really
the
couldn't have a service or hospitality industry,
no,
period. I mean, I
period.
think that at this point, a lot more people realize that the reason that we tip servers and the reason that we tip like bellmen and porters and whatnot in hotels is that the people who did those jobs in like the 1860s, 1870s, and so on was primarily freed slaves, and they weren't, the way that their employers got around having to actually pay them wages was to offload it onto the customers and to be like, you have to tip your waiter, you have to tip your porter, anyone who carries your bags for you. And, in practice, that means that you're making either no money at all or sometimes a decent amount of cash. It's all dependent on the whims of whatever people you happen to be serving that day. And so in that way, there are ways that it's better than being a servant who lives in a home. I mean, as you've said, you're not on call all day
Yeah.
long and into the night. You don't have to live with the people that you're working for in the same way. And they have less of that ownership over you in that sense. but it's also, your life is totally unpredictable. It's like hospitality sharecropping. There are
Yeah.
days that you probably end up owing your employer money. If they give you a uniform, you have to pay for that. If they give you lodging and food, it's coming out of your tips at some point. And so, of course, that's the whole history of the hospitality industry, is fighting over tipping. And is it good? Is it bad? It comes from not wanting to pay formerly enslaved people money.
Yeah.
So that should be at the center of every argument. And also, separately, there were a lot of servants at the time who, slavery is no longer a thing. So there are a lot of servants who are white immigrants, like Irish people, I think were very
Mm-hmm.
commonly servants, and Scandinavian people. And around this time, you start seeing a lot of talk in like women's periodicals and women's books about a quote unquote servant problem. What they're
Yeah.
talking about is that the women that they're used to having as servants, those women are bailing on being servants like in huge numbers. And some of them are going to do work like wait tables instead. Some of them are going out west to try and find work where they don't have to be at some rich lady's beck and call all the time. So like the nature of service is changing a lot because you've got people who are used to being on call in home servants going into restaurants instead, going to work at hotels instead, and bringing with them the conventions of like serving an upper middle class or a rich person's dinner to them. They're bringing
Mm.
all those conventions with them. They're bringing with them like the precise way that you're supposed to carve meat at the table, the direction you're supposed to serve from. All of that stuff is surviving and also changing as the locus of service mostly leaves the home. You no longer have as many in-home servants. Instead, if you want to be served, or if you're a person with not that much money and you want to recreate the experience of being served, you have to go outside the home. You have to go to a restaurant or a hotel and like spend some ad hoc money rather than paying someone a salary to wait on you hand and foot all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was done really in a it all happened in a really strange way because Rutherford Hayes and James A. Garfield, they were really passive after the Civil War in integrating freed slaves into white society, and they believed in this like let alone policy when it came to the South. So white supremacists took advantage of that, and they like filled that gap in leadership, or they were like, okay, well, if you're not going to tell us exactly what we're supposed to do, we're going to tell our people what we're supposed to do. And so Jim Crow laws took over. Black people were treated terribly, and they had violent crime against them. There was lynchings. The South was awful. So a lot of the freed slaves moved to the north to look for better conditions, to look for any job whatsoever. And they came to the north, where there weren't Jim Crow laws, but they were still discriminated against, and they were kept out of jobs and neighborhoods, and really pushed into like the worst working conditions that were possibly legally allowed, which were these jobs, which were either, being a servant or working in the hotel industry. Um, they like, even though Atlantic City was made and like needed freed slaves and needed black workers, it was as if the population there wanted them to disappear after the working day ended.
Yeah.
They viewed them as a problem, just like you were talking about with those white women talking about the servant problem. There were similar publications that wrote about the problem of black people in Atlantic City. And you're like, what do you mean the problem of black people? The Atlantic City
Right, they're
is
serving
black
you.
people, you fucking idiot. Like
They're
the
doing all
person
the work.
this article could not have been written without the black people that served the journalists who wrote this fucking article.
Right.
Like
There was
you're
this the attitude, as I understand it, of well-to-do white people in the North at the time Like, you know, I'm talking about how so many of them have Irish servants, Scandinavian servants. A big part of that is they did not want to have Black people in their homes, period.
Yeah.
Like, there was this huge wave of Black migration up north. Many of those people had been, you know, had worked in the home of Southern plantation owners and whatnot. They could not work in a home because the white homeowners up here wouldn't have them. So that's another reason, you know, they end up getting kind of sidetracked into these restaurant jobs and hotel jobs, basically doing the work of in-home servants outside the home for that other reason as well. There's, you know, there isn't a culture of having Black servants in your home up here at that time.
Yeah. And by 1915, during the summer season, 27% of the resort, 27% of Atlantic City was Black, and 95% of the hotel workforce was Black. And at first, you know, they came to work for the summer season, but then hotels started staying open year round, and so they stayed year round. And Atlantic City became the blackest city in the north, and that was seen as a problem by people by white New Jerseyans. They were not. It's weird that Atlantic City became the blackest city in the north because Jersey in general was not the most welcoming. To this day, is not the most
Right.
welcoming. So it created a lot of issues, and I want to like talk more about how that created another social section in Atlantic City in the next part. This is going to be a two-part episode because as you can already hear, there is so much to talk about Atlantic City. Like we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg on this. So we are going to get more into what happened there. But as the city was growing, we're going to talk more about that in part two. So definitely listen to part two. Definitely become a Patreon so you can hear about that because it's super interesting. But as the city was growing and there were these fancy hotels, there was sand being brought into the fancy hotels. This was uh, kind of an issue, I guess, because they were messing up the furniture that they had. They had like it, McLeod like had decided to make hotels like extravagant again. Before that, they were sort of just boarding houses, and McLeod was like, I want it to be like an event. And
Well, we
so
all want that from our
yeah.
hotels, but at the same time, you can only fight the will of God so hard. The story of Atlantic City is just the story of a bunch of rich assholes doing battle with God. God sends these biblical plagues of mosquitoes and flies and sand, and all these people are just like battering the hatches. Like, we have to have our super plush hotels at our health resort. We have to tell people that it isn't snowing when it's snowing. Like, just put it somewhere else.
No, 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 no,
All
no.
of it. Put all
No.
of it somewhere else.
No, okay? What you do is you take the indoors and you put them outdoors, which was the first boardwalk. They decided to create a boardwalk. And they first, like, at first it was McLeod and Brown and the Whites that asked for a boardwalk. And the city was like, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So what they made was just like this essentially like like a giant wooden sleeping bag that they like rolled out every summer. And it, you know, then they would take it in when the season was over. And that was put out in 1870. And it worked so well and created more businesses and more draw to the city that they were like, okay, we're going to actually build this. And so they built a permanent boardwalk in Atlantic City. It created so many more businesses. A lot of shops started popping up where they sell their tchotchkes, things that you absolutely need, like airbrush t-shirts. No, that was
Fuck
later
yeah.
on. But yeah.
The 1870s was the birth of the t-shirt with the bikini body spray painted
Yes.
onto it. It's crazy. Not many people know that that was invented to hide your horrible body that's
Mm-hmm.
covered in dust from the train and like mosquito bites and fly bites and shit. You just put it underneath a sexy bikini airbrush body That's why those were invented. The more you
Swimming
know.
costumes. That's what the original swimming costumes were.
It was just a t-shirt with a bikini body spray painted onto it.
But they did have like saltwater taffy was brought there and is still there to this day. In fact, I think today Atlantic City creates like 11,000 pounds of saltwater taffy a day. So yeah,
That's too much taffy.
a
That's
day.
an amount of that's an irresponsible amount of taffy to just generate. Are people buying that much? I mean, I like it
Yeah.
okay.
I like saltwater taffy a lot, and I feel like that's one of the very few places I can get it. So I'm definitely buying it when I'm there. But
Okay.
yeah, visitors.
11,000 pounds of it?
No, well, not just for me,
Oh, okay.
for me and my friends.
Sure, sure.
Visitors could also get wheeled around in a chair on the boardwalk, like a wheelchair. They
That's
This
just
was
a
part of
wheelchair.
yeah. No, this
That's
was
not
part of
fun.
the health resort type thing. They were like, you can get wheeled around in a chair. And at first it was for like invalids, like someone who needed to be wheeled around in a chair and get some fresh
Right.
ozone for their health.
Classic ozone situation.
But then it started to expand. Like everybody wanted to be wheeled in a chair, like a fancy lad.
It's
That
not
was it.
fun in a wheelchair. That's not like a cool activity to get schlepped around in a wheelchair. That's like a medical device.
It was so weird. I don't understand Rex, but this was popular, and this was one of the jobs that the freed slaves had. This was
God,
like
just schlepping white
schlepping
people
a
who
white
have
person
all of their
around.
bodily faculties and in no way need to be schlepped around in a wheelchair.
Nope.
And your job is to say nothing to this asshole who's like, push my chair forth and back along this wooden boardwalk, and you just have to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's your job.
Yep. Sucks.
No, thank you.
The other thing the boardwalk was popular for was basically it was a fashion show. You
Still is.
ready to wear clothes had just been invented. Before, you had to buy clothes and then have them specifically made and tailored to you, or tailor them yourself at home. But they had basically ready to wear clothes. It was like the sheen of the time. Fast fashion. It was as fast as it got.
Fast fashion at the time was like you buy a new dress once a year instead of
Yes,
once in your life.
exactly. And they showed it off on the boardwalk, and it made it ready to wear fashion made it more difficult to tell what class a person was in. So you could sort of go to Atlantic City. If you were working class in Philadelphia, you could go to Atlantic City and sort of pretend to be of a richer class than you were and get to play at what that felt like for a day. And that was the start of what made Atlantic City so popular. It also was very, very popular because Philadelphia was run by Quakers. And we will talk about that in the next episode. But that's
Turns
the.
out people fucking hated Quakers. I didn't know. In my head, I'm like, oh, the Quakers and the Friends, like their stuff is all called Friends, right?
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
kind of a bunch of
brothers.
nice guys. Yeah,
Mhm.
brothers. That seems chill. People hated their asses so much.
It's true. It's true. That's the first half of Atlantic City, and we will talk to you more about it next time. Tune in to our Patreon, and we hope you enjoyed this. Honestly, I was overwhelmed by the research on this. We might have to do more in the future to really delve into each of these things uniquely, but I liked learning all about one of my favorite places to visit in the world. And we'll talk to you next time. Okay, bye.
Bye.